Corey had asked me if I would introduce the Reverend Dr. Gabriel Salguero to you this afternoon. And for most of you, you don't need an introduction. You know him fairly well. One of the things, there's so many things I could say about him, but one of the things that really sticks with me, and some of you may have been here, I believe it was 2 years ago in April, he was with us for chapel. And it was right after Easter. And there had been a picture that had kind of gone around Facebook of Gabriel and Jeanette, his wife, who quite often is with him, who were in the White House with a small group for an Easter service, and the two of them were leading in prayer. And just a small semicircle, you could see them up front, you could see the president, you could see George Biden's ear. And there were a few other people around in there. But, you know, Corey was kind of making a big deal out of that, and as Gabriel got up and in a very humble way began to talk about that, he said something that has stuck with me. It's a phrase I can't quite get away from. I almost wish it was one of those he hadn't said. But this is what he said. He said, when you have a seat at the table, it's not about you. When you have a seat at the table, it's your responsibility to represent those who will never have a seat at that table. And that's what education is all about, and that's what Eastern Nazarene College is about. And so help me today welcome our friend, Dr. Gabriel.
I always get embarrassed when Dr. McGee introduces me.
I didn't tell the other joke.
Oh, no.
I didn't tell this.
A much better story. I'm looking at a gift I received the last time I was here. I received this from you all. And you have three wonderful words on the bottom of your emblem. It's Via Veritas, Vida, way, truth, life. From the Gospel of John, right? Hopefully, it's three great pillars of information, and those things are closely related. So when I was invited here by Dr. McGee and Dr. McPherson to do chapel, I am profoundly aware that it is Hispanic Heritage Month, and that Monday is Columbus Day, but in our community we don't call it Columbus Day. We call it Día de la Resistencia Indígena, Day of National Indigenous Resistance. It's a little bit different perspective on that day, because history has multiple prisms through which to look and interpret, right? Some people came on the Mayflower, and some people came under the Mayflower, and somehow out of that motley crew of humanity, we have this grand, what Alexis de Tocqueville called the grand experiment of democracy, with all of its warts, pimples, and also strengths and virtues, right? And so we wrestle with that. And so I'm aware that it's Hispanic Heritage Month. I'm aware of Eastern Nazarene's commitment to find ways towards justice and education, to speak truth into education and justice, and to have an education and justice system that brings life. And so it's into that context that this conversation, and so I will talk for a few minutes. And I was particularly commissioned to talk about NALEC. NALEC is the acronym for the organization that I have the privilege of presiding, National Latino Evangelical Coalition. If you have time, you can just NALEC.org, and you can get a deeper perspective of what that is. But just a 30,000-foot view, it's a coalition of Hispanic evangelical churches committed to the common good. We're about 3,000 congregations nationwide. Obviously, it's Latino and evangelical, so that tells you two of the kind of realities that define us. It's interdenominational, so we have Nazarenes, Wesleyans, Church of God, Pentecostal of every stripe, and Reformed. And what we're trying to do is advance the common good, justice and the common good from a biblical perspective and an evangelical perspective. I have discovered that the evangelical perspective is not always a biblical perspective. Although we try to do that, we have some work to do. And I don't say they, I say we, because I'm also responsible for some of that. So, part of the work that I do outside of being a pastor of the Lamb's Church and being happily married for 13 years, right? 4 months and 5 hours and 25 minutes. And raising 2 boys, John, Gabriel, and Seth, who are 9 and 5, is this what I like to call the prophetic role of the church. In secular terms, it's called advocacy, right? Or advocacy for the common good. But I much prefer to stick to the biblical language of prophetic work. And prophetic has 2 definitions for me. Number 1 is it's speaking truth to power. Speaking truth to power. But there's another, and that's a very Western, modern kind of German epistemological understanding of prophet, vis-a-vis the line of Luther and Abraham Kuyper and Dietrich Bonhoeffer and all great heroes that I respect. But I think that definition lacks a second layer, because to be prophetic is not just to speak truth to power. It's also to speak truth from the place of the disempowered. That's a particular contribution that people who have been disenfranchised, right? Let me say that I agree with Michel Foucault that, and I know his name is Michel, but it's a man, that power is ubiquitous. Right. Power is everywhere. It is everywhere, right? Now, degrees of power vary. We don't all have the same power. Right? We all have different leverages of power, but power is like sin. It's everywhere, right? Reinhold Niebuhr says the easiest doctrine of Christianity to prove is sin, because all you have to do is look in the mirror, right? So I have this analysis of power and the prophetic role. Walter Brueggemann in The Prophetic Imagination, pages 7 to 11, he talks about that the role of the church is to have a prophetic imagination, to think creatively of what the world can be, right? Not just about the isness of the world, but the oughtness of the world, right? So our job, our calling, our passion, our vocation is to speak truth to power, but also to allow the truth from disempowered groups to come to the surface, right? Everybody has a voice, but not everybody gets a listening, right? So, everybody has a voice, but not everybody gets a listening. And when I speak voice, I'm not speaking literally, but metaphorically. Okay? So that's part of the NALIC job. So let me give you some important context which define the work that we do. I'm the face of the coalition, but believe me, the coalition is great men and women, thinkers, pastors, grassroots organizers, and mobilizers. If it weren't for them, there would be no NALIC. So I have to first begin with that recognition. There are 50.4 million Hispanics in the United States. 50.4 million Hispanics in the United States. Pew says that about 15 to 17% of those 50.4 million Hispanics are evangelical. So that puts us at about 8 million Hispanic evangelicals in the United States, give or take. If you count Puerto Rico and such, that number can, or some of the U.S. territories, that number can expand. So about 8 million. By the way, the other large Hispanic group in the United States growing at the same pace as Hispanic evangelicals? Nuns. N-O-N-E-S. They're about 12% of the Hispanic population. So, and of course, the largest group of Latino faith-affiliated groups are the Catholics. They're about 84, 86%. Okay. So out of this reality, out of the 8 million Hispanic evangelicals, since the, 1980s, there's been a real emergence of voices of Hispanic evangelicals in the public sphere. NALIC is just one of the national organizations. We're not the only one. There are others. There's another one called Esperanza USA, based out of Philadelphia. They are the host of the National Hispanic Prayer Breakfast, and its founder and president is Reverend Luis Cortez, who is a Baptist, an American Baptist, a good friend. He's done great work, mostly focused on community development, and there's others like Codelico and others. But NALEC, as I've seen it, is what we've tried to do is to provide a broader public policy agenda, based on our Christian, biblical, evangelical, and Latino commitments. I know there's a lot of commitments, but somehow that milieu comes together in a way that makes sense. You can buy me coffee, we can talk about it later. Of course, it's got to be grown in the right places and by the right people, okay? Just to be consistent. So, there are three foci that we have. We do many things, but these are our three main foci. We call them the PI initiatives. PI. Poverty, immigration, and education. That's why it's easy to remember. Poverty, immigration, and education. Number one is protecting anti-poverty programs, right? At home and abroad. USA, domestic, WIC, SNAP. Some people call it the social safety net. We advocate to protect the social safety net in people. So we do a lot of work around public policy. The second, and these are not in order of priority, this just make the acronym work, okay? Is immigration. We have been fighting for well over a decade on immigration reform, and that's what I'm going to talk mostly about today, immigration reform, and a little bit about the crisis in the southwest border of what I spoke in chapel, the unaccompanied alien children, as the government calls them, or just children, as I like to call them, okay? Immigration reform has had multiple lives and deaths. It's been up and down in the news, and we've had some small victories and some, frankly, I'm talking politically now, not theologically or eschatologically. I'm Christian, so I, like Jürgen Moltmann, believe our God is a God of hope, right? But, you know, immigration has died the deaths of 1,000 cuts, right? It's up, it's down, it's way up, it's way down, and right now it's down. It's really, that they've kicked it, slapped it around, they've done a lot, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And the third E is educational equity. We advocate for educational equity, that a person, a child's educational opportunity should not be dependent on the zip code where he or she was born, which is the reality now in America and, quite frankly, around the world. That if you're born in a certain zip code, you have exponential capacity to succeed over and against somebody born in a different zip code, because we have such, what Jonathan Kozel called in his book, savage inequalities around education. Now, those are our three foci. We do other things. We advise on cultural production. So if you're in media, if you like art and things like that, NALEC has been advisors on several films that we think have transcendent value. The most recent one we've advised on is The Good Lie, with Reese Witherspoon, that just came out Friday. It came out last Friday, which is about the lost boys of the Sudan. You know why it's called The Good Lie, right? It's called The Good Lie because it's based on Huck Finn, right? When Jim is being persecuted, Huck lies to protect his life. This is not uncommon in Christian circles. We lie a lot. When we export Bibles to countries where it's illegal, we're lying and we're breaking the law. When Corrie ten Boom was hiding Jews in her closet and the Gestapo came to his door and said, "Are there any Jews here?" What did she say? She said no, she was lying. When Rahab, just so you know I read the Bible, in the book of Judges, hid the two spies and they came looking, right? So, right, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, there are a whole bunch of people who participate in something called The Good Lie. It's very complicated. I don't have the time to unpack the ethics of the summa bonum today, but if you buy me coffee, I promise you, I will talk about it all day and all night. You notice the theme here, coffee. Just write it down and I'll go back to it, okay? Huck Finn says, "I lied to protect you," but it was a good lie. It was a good lie. Okay? Now, I'm not advocating lying. I just want you to think more broadly about what is good, what is bad. Dietrich Bonhoeffer's in Letters and Papers from Prisons, pages 18 and on, he talks about what you do when all the moral fiber underneath your feet is removed. And good means bad, and bad means good. I want you to think about that during the question and answer period, particularly around issues of immigration. Okay? All right. So let me talk a little bit more narrowly. I just gave you 30,000 foot. Let me narrow just a little bit more on immigration. Immigration reform has been advocated. Now I'm going to do the policy analysis, and I'll do a little bit of the biblical theological analysis. Immigration reform has been advocated by Republicans and Democrats alike. It seems that it's a bipartisan issue that would be easy to get policy around, right? Or George Bush, Jr., I call him, right? He advocated for immigration reform together with, at that time in the Senate, the two champions on the Republicans was McCain, and the Democratic side was Kennedy, your very own Senator Kennedy. McCain-Kennedy was an immigration reformer. That had a lot of chance in the Senate, and it died, it didn't make it. Later, two others, a Republican and a Democrat, Schumer, who's a Democrat, and Lindsey Graham, who's a Republican, also advocated. So there was a lot of movement. Then, more recently, in the last 3 years, there was something called the Gang of Eight. The Gang of Eight. 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats in the Senate who advocated for immigration reform. They brought a bill to the floor of the Senate that actually passed. It actually, a miracle. It actually passed on the Senate floor. Both Republicans and Democrats got behind it, and it never met the floor of the House. It did not come to the floor of the House. So that's the last iteration of an immigration reform bill that has kind of had national exposure, that both the left and the right got behind. In January of this year, there were principles that came both out of the Democratic caucus and the Republican caucus of why immigration is reform. Reform is important and is a good thing for the country. People on the right, like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and Grover Norquist and Marco Rubio got behind it. People who are on the progressive side, like the National Council of La Raza, the NAACP, and others got behind it. And still there was no movement. It died. It actually didn't die. It didn't even come to the surface. They went on recess. One of the things that complicated the issue of immigration reform, now I'm just talking politically, and then I'll talk a little bit theologically, just raw kind of political analysis, is the UAC crisis, the crisis on the southwest border. In March of 2014, the UN High Commission on Refugees, the UNHCR, said that over the last 10 months, before that, there was an avalanche of influx of undocumented, unaccompanied alien children coming from they came from more than that, but the top 3 countries were Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. Right? The UN High Commission on Refugees says there were 2 main reasons, not the only reasons, but 2 principal reasons why they were coming over the border unaccompanied on a train called the Beast. Literally, that's the name, La Bestia, they called it. They came on the top of the train. A lot of them came because they were snuck in through this group that are often called to as coyotes or coyotes, smugglers, depending on how you see them. It's a very complicated issue. It's very easy to caricature the coyotes. It's much more complicated than one would think. So here's what you have. Number 1, the advancement of international gangs, mostly known as La Mara Salvatrucha, MS-13, okay, which is very strong in Honduras, particularly Tegucigalpa and San Pedro Sula, and also Guatemala, and to some degree El Salvador. They were trying to recruit young children into their gangs. By young children, I mean as young as 11, 10 years old, trying to prostitute young women. So a lot of parents are met with the unenviable decision, kind of the Sophie's choice, if you will. Do I keep my kid here where he or she can die or be prostituted, or do I send him north to hopefully he or she gets to the southwest border, right, and is able to have at least a chance at living, given that there's certain laws that protect children who come into the United States. The law among evangelicals was known as the William Wilberforce Act. William Wilberforce Act. The actual name of the law is TVPRA, Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act. Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act, known by us as the William Wilberforce Law, that was passed by, I think, like a 92% bipartisan ratio. I mean, people thought it was good to protect trafficking victims until this crisis happened when a group asked for it to be repealed. The law says that if you come to the United States and you are a minor and you are unaccompanied, you are protected by the law to certain I'm paraphrasing the law, obviously, certain due processes, right? So they can't just give you, you know, a kangaroo court and send you back. Because you're a minor, you're entitled by law to certain due processes because you could have been a victim of sexual trafficking, human trafficking, exploitation, some kind of slavery, etc. So there are a whole list of laws. But TVPRA, or Withholding Wilberforce, only applies to countries that are not contiguous with the United States. So if you came from Mexico, you're not covered. If you're not, or Canada for that matter. But if you're Guatemala, El Salvador, etc., you're happy. When the crisis comes, number one, because of the exploitation of gangs and violence. The other one, of course, is, you could imagine, extreme poverty. Extreme poverty, especially in rural areas. So parents are, you know, they struggle to imagine you have a kid, you think, tomorrow they're going to come and they're going to ask me for my kid, and if I don't give them to them, they're going to shoot us all in the head. So what are you thinking? You know, how many of you have seen in the news, how could people send their kids across the country without being supervised? How many have actually heard that? Well, it's a little more complicated than that. It's a lot more complicated than that, right? Because if the alternative is she'll be shot in the head, or prostituted, or I send them with a guy who my family knows who's trafficked, let's be clear, it's trafficking, who's trafficked 12 other kids and they've been reunited with an uncle there, what choice would you make? What would you do? Right? So, in 2010, in 2009, 2010, the numbers were maybe 8,000, 9,000, 10,000, 12,000 a year. Toward the end of 2013, maybe even the middle of 2013, and into 2014, by the summer of 2014, we were at over 50,000 with a projection of 100,000 by December of 2014. Obviously, the summer most things slow down. Here's what happens. It goes all over the news. How many saw it in the news this summer? It was over. It was on CNN, it was on MSNBC, it was on Fox, it was PBS, it was everywhere, right? And as you can imagine, when it comes on the news, there were a variety of opinions on how we should respond to this, right? One of them was a group of people with signs waiting for the kids on buses saying, go back home, right? Which means, go back to your dad. Which is, yeah, go back home where you can be exploited, right? And another one was like, how can we do this? How can we receive them? So there's a back. I was on CNN and they did this interview with me, and I think I said in chapel, I said, you know, we do not approach public policy as pundits. We approach it as Christians. And for me, the question on any policy, I don't care if a Democrat puts it, a Republican, an independent, male, woman, that I like the candidate or I don't like the candidate. For me, the question is always, what is the moral thing to do? I'm a Christian. And I don't take off my Christianity when it comes to public policy. I don't take off my Christianity when it comes to voting, when it comes to economics, even if it costs me something, right? I am not Puerto Rican first. I'm not American first. I'm definitely not Nazarene first. I am a first and foremost a follower of Jesus Christ. And that defines everything for me. Not a lot of things. It defines everything. What would Jesus do is not a cute commercial for me or something I just put on my bracelet. I do put it on my bracelet because it helps me in an iconic form remember my commitment as a follower of Jesus Christ. But I really take it seriously. Okay, so the government, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is a subcategory of the Department of Homeland Security, approached multiple organizations, Catholic Charities, Lutheran Immigration Refugee Services, SEA, I mean, there's just a whole host of comments. But in the middle of that, there were some conversations in the House of Representatives. How many of you know how much they asked for to address this particular crisis of 52,000 children? Does anybody know how much the government asked for? You want to guess how much they asked for as a budget allocation? $3 billion. $3 billion. That's what the White House asked for. How much do you think they got? Anybody want to guess?
Was it 700 million?
Yes. So what percentage of 3 billion is 700 million?
Not enough.
It's not even 50%. 50% would be 1.5 billion, right? 700 million is under 50% of 1.5 million, because that would be 750,000. So it's less than a quarter of the percentage, right? But there was money given to another thing. Repatriation. Would you like a synonym for repatriation? Deportation, right? And some members of Congress actually made it contingent, passing the budget contingent on repealing DACA. DACA, Deferred Action for Child Arrivals, also known as the DREAM Act, which was not really an act, it was an executive order that President Obama passed the Friday before Father's Day a year ago. Okay? It didn't matter because the Senate would not allow it. That only passed in the House. But the budget did put some considerable constraints, right? So initially they had $3 billion, and now they're giving $700 million, right? So now, what do you do? And also, they gave a lot of money to repatriation. So I went with a delegation to Honduras when they flew a whole charter plane, it's like a bus, that'd be impressive. Our charter plane to Tegucigalpa filled with children. And the First Lady of Honduras was there to receive them. Where are they flying to? What are they flying to? And why should we care? Why should we have a whole Friday lecture about this? What do I care? I gotta find it. I'm trying to get away for a long weekend. Why is this important? Because as a Christian, you have a voice and you have a responsibility. And when laws are passed, you either affirm them or denounce them. It matters because these children are created in the image of God. And they are your sisters and they are your brothers. And what happens to them happens to you. Right? So we have a crisis that they're trying to respond to, which I understand, by repatriating. And if they were being repatriated to safe environments, that's one thing. But they're being repatriated to very, very, very dangerous environments. At the same time, we're asking other countries to receive millions of refugees. Syria has received over 1 million refugees. Syria has over 1 million refugees. Okay, on that border of Syria, we can't receive 52,000. 60,000, 100 of children. I'm not even talking about adults. So it becomes a question of what is it that we value as a moral agenda? Where is it that our money, right? You pay taxes, right? Your taxes, you're a steward. It's a Christian stewardship. Where should your taxes go to? And what do you value? So all those questions. So here's a response. Our response is you can house some of these children. You can have temporary foster care. You can do that while they're being placed with family relatives in the United States or a safe relative in the country of origin. But that's just a simple kind of response. It's a necessary. It's complicated, but it's a necessary response. But the larger response is, what are the root causes of this? Why is this happening? Why are thousands of kids leaving their homes to an uncertain future? Why? Well, the other question is, what are our foreign policies? What is our commitment to our nearest neighbor in Guatemala, Mexico, Salvador, Belize, Honduras, Nicaragua, right? As well as Canada, China, right? What are our commitments in terms of foreign aid? Right? So it's a immigration is a very complicated issue, just as Ebola is, right? Most of us respond to a crisis when it comes to us, instead of being preventive. Saying, hey, we need economic sustainability. We need safe havens in countries where it's not okay for an 11-year-old child to think he's going to be recruited into a gang. And by recruitment, it's not like, do you want to join? Right? It's not a voluntary army. It's, you will join the gang tomorrow. And if you don't join the gang tomorrow, we're going to come back and visit your sister and your mother. Right? She was, how could you ever join a gang? I mean, it's not that simple. It's much more complex. In the middle of all this, NALEC tries to provide a response, even in the middle of budget cuts and a government that's not sure what they want to do with its children. They're unsure. America, the United States of America, has a mixed legacy on immigration. It's mixed. We have Emma Lazarus, the new Colossus, which is on the feet of Lady Liberty. Bring me your poor, your tired, your huddled masses, yearning to be free. The tempest tossed. You've all familiar with this? It's on the statue of Lady Liberty, right? But then we also have the Chinese Exclusion Act, where we actually had Chinese people in detention camps. We as a country discriminated against Irish when they were fleeing from the potato famine, right? At the same time, we have President Kennedy's famous book, A Nation of Immigrants, right? So it's a very complicated milieu of responses to the immigration crises, and they will come from time to time. This is not the first crisis on immigration. It's certainly not going to be the last one. So people will respond to immigration, but they won't respond to foreign policy. Those are interstitial. So here's what evangelicals have done. Let me give you 4 things that you can look up on your own, and then I'll open to some questions. There's something called the Evangelical Immigration Table, EIT. Dr. McGee is a signer of the Evangelical Immigration Table principles, as are the 6 general superintendents of the Church of the Nazarene. How do I know they signed it? Because I called each of them on the cell phone every day till they signed it. One of the keys to prophetic ministry is resilience and consistency. The Civil Rights Act took more than a decade. Women's enfranchisement was over 100 years. From the first meeting in Seneca Falls to the actual passing of the 19th Amendment, that didn't happen overnight. It takes resilience. Immigration reform, we've been fighting it for over a decade. Right? You have to be resilient. You have to use the German theologians, you have to have a cantus firmus. You got to have a song inside of you that keeps you marching. Because if not, your first defeat, you'll quit. You will quit. Because this is, power concedes nothing without demand. Right? All of this, I've been in jail, and I'm singing, right? I'm singing in jail, I'm singing, ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. It's cool and cute the first hour. You feel like, yeah, I'm a hero. But after 2 hours, you really have to have an internal song. And if you get arrested on a Friday and they don't have a judge till Monday, it's not that cute anymore. It's not about Twitter and Facebook. It's about, is this cause, is it moral enough? Is it to quote Paul, is it a high enough calling that I'm willing to spend days and weeks in jail for it? Did you know most good literature that's theological was written from prison? Letters and papers from prison, letters from a Birmingham jail, most of the Pauline epistles, John the theologian from exile. Now, I know you New Testament scholars know it's not John. I know all about the QRS. I went to seminary, but you know what I mean. Right? There's something about what Dr. King called redemptive suffering. Not all suffering is redemptive. If you're a victim of domestic abuse, that's not redemptive. Somebody needs to get arrested. But there are redemptive suffering. Mandela, 27 years in a jail in South Africa. Mother Teresa living in leper colonies, sacrificing all the good things in life that she could have had, okay? The commitment to voluntary poverty, okay? All of these things, right? But the question is, are you committed to a cause to the degree, I've been up to the Senate, I don't know, in the last, let's just say the last 3 years, I've been up there more than 50 times. I met with Paul Ryan, Boehner, Obama. I met with them all, left, right, and they're like, Reverend, thank you for praying for us. We want to do the right thing, right? And then 2 weeks later, you see them on the news saying exactly the opposite of what they told you in the private office. And you just want to spontaneously combust. You get this kind of prophetic frustration. And so you have to find that place, right? That's why prayer is deeply a part of this kind of work. Because if not, you will hate people instead of hating injustice. And never are those two things the same.
Right.
So here we are on immigration, right? The numbers have dwindled, as is custom the case, August and September. Sometimes they'll pick up. I heard Jay Johnson say something 48 hours ago that makes me think he knows we were right? What are we going to do? What is the right call? Part of it is there's a lot we can't do because the law doesn't allow us. That's why we advocate for changing laws. Because there are things that no matter how good you are, how great your church is, how great your nonprofit is, if you don't change the law, your hands are handcuffed. Right? I love black people. All we need to do is change hearts. And if we still had the change heart mentality, we'd still have segregation. Because it takes a long time to change 8 million hearts. Because some things you need legislation, and the hearts will follow later. Right? So people say, no, because the gospel is about changing hearts. It is absolutely about changing hearts. But it is also about changing laws. That's right. An unjust law is no law at all. Henry David Thoreau. Okay? And so what we do here, in this context of, hey, we've been fighting 10 years. People promise, they defeat. They promise to defend. The response is always resilience. And if you have a gospel, preach it. Preach that gospel. And preaching doesn't mean just speak it. You do something. You march for it. You advocate for it. You get arrested for it. Now, I'm not advocating that because it's not, believe me, it sounds cool. It is not cool. At all. There's nothing cool about it. Especially when you have to tell your wife, honey, I'm not going to be home to pick up the kids. Could you make sure they get picked up? Oh, where are you? I'm being processed, being fingerprinted. It's not cool. Especially if you're married and have children. Okay? Where are we in the present? The rumors are that President Obama will take executive action after the midterm elections and before Christmas. Some people thinking he's going to go big. What does mean going big? What does that mean? That means that if he takes executive action, it can impact between 4 to 5 million people. There are close to 12 million undocumented people in the United States of America. Close to 12, many of them women and children. And most of them did not cross the border illegally. That's a myth, and it's not true. Most people are here because they overstayed their visas. That's the majority of undocumented immigrants. Okay? So when people say build a wall, most of undocumented immigration has nothing to do with crossing a porous border. They come here legally and overstay their visas, never go back home. So you could build a 100-foot wall, that's not going to change anything. You need to modernize the system. Okay? We have a 20th century immigration law and a 21st century immigration challenge. And that's the issue. If the president takes executive action, that will have political ramifications on the left and the right. But people are going to start flooding, what they call BIAs, board certified immigration offices. People are going to try to get legalized. Some of them are already wrapping up, pay back taxes, do all the things, show they've been in this country since 2007. There's a whole kind of. At the same time, that news is going to get back to Latin America. What do you think the response is going to be? What do you think when in mid-November, before Thanksgiving or during Advent, they say they just allowed deferred action for 4 million undocumented immigrants? How do you think that's going to sound in the rest of the world? What do you think the response? Now, mind you, you still have 8 million living in the shadows, but that's going to do something to the collective psychology of a region. And the church has to be ready. Listen, I could talk about this all day and all night, but I want to more engage where you are and what you want to hear. And I don't necessarily need to talk about immigration. We can talk about any one of our other works or what this means personally as my sense of vocation. This is really, I learned from you, and hopefully I can give something back. Is that all right? Thank you for your time. I'll open the floor. I want to clap or just pray for you. Do both. The first one's always the toughest. Yes.
So you are right that, am I correct to think that you're working with the center in New York where we're having the children come and stay in those centers? Is that true that you're working with them?
We partner with them. I don't work with them.
Okay. And so what exactly is the partnership that you're doing with them, and how are you guys helping?
Well, they're right up there. Something of them. Well, so let me give you the 30,000-foot view, because it's not just New York.
No, there's
Yeah, there are 12. Well, I'm gonna give you the 30,000-foot view. The idea is that you house children. First of all, they have to be under 18 to be considered unaccompanied children. So, I mean, you probably know this, but I just want to make sure. I don't know who knows what, right? You house them while they're reunified with their family. So that could be 30 days or 45 days or more. But it's usually a 30 to 45 day window. You house them. You don't just house them. You feed them. You know, everything that comes with that. You provide some sort of education, some sort of protection, while all the time you're trying to find their relative, either at home or they enter into some kind of proceeding, right? So when they get out, let me say, most children do not cross the border illegally. They turn themselves in. They're being apprehended. So people say, we need to close the border. The border's not porous. They're turning themselves in because they'd rather be detained in some, Lord help me, in some poorly lit facility than live in some very challenging. So they turn themselves in. The government processes them, DCCP, the department, right? Then it turns them over to DHS, Department of Homeland. DHS turns them over to ORR, but they're already entered into proceedings. They've already been processed. So they're either going to be deported or reunited with their family, or there are many options depending on what they qualify for. ALA, the Association of Immigrant Lawyers, has said that 70% would probably qualify for refugee status based on what their realities are. I'm not a lawyer, but that's what, I'm just giving you how they're saying. Right, so churches, 12, 13 sites, including CCDA now, like the sites in New York, have tried to, I believe this is a difficult partnership, with the Office of Refugee Resettlement to receive their kids. You get a grant, it's a government grant, it doesn't cover everything. You have to raise money. It's like the government gives you this much and you got to do all of this work. It's, but that's how they do it. They place you, because you can't get access to those children without the government. And you need a national grant holder for certain amounts of money that have a proven track record of receiving grants. Okay? But while they're there, you have to feed them, take care of them, do all of that, have medical team. It's a very complicated process. Right? And let me tell you, working with the government is not easy. Not easy. It's as generous as I can be because I'm being recorded. Thank you.
And for the children that are coming over unaccompanied, I understand that many of them do have relatives here in the U.S. that they can stay with. But for those that don't have any relatives or any contacts, what do you think would be the ideal situation? Like, what should we be doing for them? If you could change the laws, whatever you want.
Look, I think that if we had a more competent foster care system with people who are responsible, you're asking me about ideal, right?
Yes.
Okay, it's different than reality. Yes. We could place them in foster care, caring families who would raise them as their own and love on them. That's the ideal, right? Most children who come have relatives here. They wouldn't come if they didn't. And how do you know? So, still being recorded? So here's how we know who their relatives are. When they come, they have a number written either on their belt, on the inside of their belt, or on the inside of their shoe. That number is a relative living in the United States. That's how you're able to connect them to the family member living in the United States. Ideal for me is the kid should be with his family or her family, if it's safe. Right? if it's safe. That's the ideal. Let me say this. Who's that? George Will. George Will is a conservative political pundit. George Will, a conservative, says the United States could absorb 50 to 100,000 kids easily. It would not be a burden on our economy or things like that. Actually, immigration reform would be over $1 billion boom to the U.S. economy. That's just a fact from the Bipartisan Policy Center, chaired by Condoleezza Rice. So, you know, I'm not giving you talking points from the left. This is just bipartisan. $1 billion boom to the U.S. economy if we did immigration reform today. Why are we not doing it? If it makes economic sense and it makes moral sense. If it makes economic sense and moral sense, why don't we have immigration reform? Things that make you go, right? You know, there's something wrong. There's a high level dysfunction and inertia in a system that all the chips line up, and 2/3 of the country want immigration reform. 67% of Americans want immigration reform. 67%. The majority of Republicans want it. The majority of Democrats want it. Even a slim majority of Tea Party people want immigration reform. Why isn't it getting done? We have won the argument of bipartisanship. So it's not a left-right issue. There's something else going on here. Take me out to coffee. I'll give you more details.
It seems like resistance to immigration is aimed primarily at Hispanics and the southern border. Is that accurate, or is there equal resistance in other regions and that just gets the spotlight?
Look, the majority of undocumented immigrants are Hispanic in this country. But it is certainly not Hispanic only, right? We have a large, in New York, high-level Asian undocumented immigrants. Particularly, I'm in China, our church is in Chinatown. We have a lot of undocumented immigrants in Chinatown. There's a group called Irish Immigration Reform of undocumented Irish workers, right? So it's a universal challenge. The problem is because the disproportionate numerical number is Hispanic, it gets couched as a Latino issue. But it's not a Latino issue. It's a human issue. It's a moral issue. Dare I say it? It's a spiritual issue. The word immigrant or stranger appears 92 times in the Old Testament. It's ger, G-E-R-E, from which you get in the book of Exodus, Hagar. Hagar, the stranger. Her name meant the stranger. That's what it meant, right? And the Bible says the way you should treat the stranger as you treat the citizen. It's right there in the scripture. Hebrews 13:2. Remember hospitality, because many of you have entertained angels unaware. Matthew 25. For I was a stranger and you welcomed me. None other than Jesus of Nazareth said that. And that, by the way, that pericope is called the judgment of the nations. Right? So overwhelmingly, hospitality is the biblical principle. Now, let's be careful. The Bible does not endorse a particular public policy. What it gives you is principles from which you can draw policy. Right? And that's where, pardon the pun, the devil's in the details. How do we come up with a policy that both Republicans and Democrats can sign up to and is humane and is moral? And it's not make it a Latino issue, but it makes it a global issue.
Quick question, probably too long of an answer, but coffee. Yeah, I'll be down with that. I've tried to sit down yourself, we'll do that. But what is NALIC suggesting in terms of immigration reform?
Yeah. That undocumented immigrants be provided an earned path to citizenship. Earned path to citizenship. Why? Because if it's not earned, you're not going to get bipartisan support. Right? So we're idealists, but we're also realists. You need policies to get done. Okay, so an earned path to citizenship. That family unification be one of the principles under which we allow people to stay in this country. Not the only one. That workers are not exploited. Okay, so I'm giving you broadly the principles, right? That we modernize the immigration system so we don't have the same problem in another 10 years. We need to modernize it. So those are just a few things. For me, personally, earned path to citizenship is high. I cannot believe that we're going to have a permanent underclass of 12 million people. That is morally unacceptable to me. Right? Now, if you do, that may not happen year one. There may be a process. You may need a process to get the political votes in. And I understand that. You know, I don't have political naivete. But at the end of the day, second-class citizenship, we tried that. It didn't look so good in America. Why should we go there again? I mean, those are just 4 principles. There's more like 15 or 20, but those are the top ones. Yep.
I have a question. So there's statistics and projections that by the year 2020, Hispanics will be the majority of the population in the U.S. So I'm kind of curious, do you think that they're trying to refrain from having these children coming here because they feel that there's too much of that population here, or that, you know, we're being some type of impediment in this population? Like, I've always been curious.
Yeah, that's a great question. I have to be careful. We all should be careful of inferring people's actions, right? So let me be clear. Is there xenophobia in this country? Yes. Without a shadow of a doubt. Is everyone who's opposed to immigration reform xenophobic? Probably not. Okay, so you see that as a nuanced response, right? So, you know, I think some people are afraid of what the browning, blacking of America may do, but I also think, you know, down the street over here at Harvard, there was a guy named Samuel Huntington, right? Remember Samuel Huntington? Does anybody remember Samuel Huntington? The Clash of Civilizations professor at Harvard. He wrote Clash of Civilizations. He also wrote another book that's lesser known. It's called Who We Are, Hispanics in America. My Lord, I mean, Huntington's brilliant political philosopher. Brilliant. My Lord, that was the most xenophobic theorist I ever heard in that book. I was shocked by it, right? So there's some of that, right? But I also think there's also some people say, why should we do it? It's not fair. It's these kind of epistemological assumptions of meritocracy. You know, what does it mean to be fair, right? You know, what does it mean that somebody came here illegally, undocumented, but somebody came here legally? Why don't they go to the back of the line? Well, that's because there is no line. It's a myth. That's why people want to reform the system, so that there can be a line. Right? So people say, get in the back of the line. The answer to that is, there is no line. You need to create a line, right? So there's fear, but I also think there's this kind of classical sense of American fairness, which is not really fair, because, you know, just ask, you know, Native Americans and African American slaves how that worked out, right? But I think there's some legitimacy here. And so what we have to do when we're talking about political philosophy is, how do you converge this understanding of kind of fairness of jurisprudence with a humane response to international crises? That's not easy. It's not easy. If it were easy, it would have been done already. But let me say this. It is not a question of immigration reform, if immigration reform will happen. It's going to happen. It is going to happen. Eventually, in this generation, it's going to happen. The question is, how many people are we going to allow to suffer before we get it done? How many kids are we going to have fearful that their parents will be deported and they'll be home alone as a 7-year-old? What kind of country are we? That we're deporting people's parents and they're afraid. We're better than that. And thank you. I think I've got one more. I don't know, I'm looking at you, I'm being sensitive to that. Yes.
Can you say a word about drug policy and the role that our drug war created these migration flows in the first place?
You, sir, are going to get me in trouble.
You turn that off, please.
No, absolutely. Look, it's complicated, as you know. You think about the industry of narco trafficking, right? How many billions of dollars it makes for people, for certain people, right? Why are we selling drugs? Who are the consumers? What country is the highest consumer of drugs? Right? It's not just supply. The problem is not just supply, it's demand, right? We usually attack it on the supply side and not on the demand side, right? And so now, I mean, think, you know, narco traffickers, they're smart. The reason they're making billions of dollars is because it may be Machiavellian genius, but it's genius, you know, evil, right? So think about what's happening while you're fighting a drug war, right? And you have a broken immigration system. And how, if you're, right, you were in Chicago the other day, right? What's the system that they said they have now, that the coyotes have on the cell phone, the track, right? So now they don't even walk you there. They give you a cell phone with directions there, and they could file 100 miles away, tell you how to get to the southwest border. And you think building a wall? I mean, the coyote system is light years away from the broken immigration system, right? At the same time, some of these people know, hey, one of the things I can do to make sure I have a profitable narco trafficking, since it's illegal, is I'm going to exploit these children and or their families to get them in the country. While you're focusing on that, I'm going to, this over here, you know, don't mind those vans going this way, just arrest these kids, right? It's a very shrewd, if malevolent system, right? So how do we resolve it? Right? Every policy must have priorities. What are we prioritizing in terms of enforcement, in terms of sustainability, in terms of human dignity, right? Right? And also, what are we doing on the demand side in the United States? Cartels will stop when people stop buying. In our inner cities, in our suburban, you know, when we have the little reefer parties, then nobody gets arrested in suburbia because it's done inside the house. But if you're outside on the street in Ferguson, you're going to arrest 100 of them. You're doing the same thing, right? So it's very complicated. Oh, you know. So I think what we need to do is really address priorities and what that means for human dignity and human flourishing. That's all I had. Yes?
I wasn't the hand, but I do have a question.
Yes.
I was just curious, what is it that you do, maybe some practical suggestions on how you sustain yourself in the midst of this complexity and that move towards resilience and things like that, as much as
I pray.
your personal care practices?
I pray. And I pray often. I learned the discipline of prayer as a child. My wife is an evening prayer person. I'm an early morning prayer person. And my prayer is, I'm contemplative for part of the time. The other time I'm very vociferous. Like, Lord, please don't make me slap this person. You know, like I confess my brokenness, you know, like, God, don't let it make me something that I'm not. Let me reflect the kingdom principles. Turn the other cheek. Bless those who persecute you. Love your enemies. You know, I pray scripture over myself. I pray the virtues of Jesus over me. I pray the New Testament. You know, that's one. Number two, I read. And I read the stories of people who've overcome incredible odds. Mandela's biography, Mother Teresa's biography. I've read like, I don't know, 8 different king biographies. Ana Maria Matute. You know, I just read, you know, I haven't gone through anything. I'm not a hero. I've done nothing. 4 days in jail is nothing. Mandela was 27 years in prison. I'm nothing. You know? Mother Teresa gave up her whole life. King had his house bombed and had a crowd saying, let's go get him. And he gets out there and says, we will overcome their overwhelming capacity for evil with the capacity for good. In the Pentecostal church, that's called testimony. So I read testimonies. And the other thing I do is I sit with the people who are most directly impacted by the evil or the oppression. And what I will find, not 100% of the time, but overwhelmingly, that they're the most gracious people They're not, it's amazing. I'm not an activist. I'm a Christian. And everything I do must rise and fall out of my Christianity. Everything. And let me say one other thing. The Gospel of John is a gift to me. The Gospel of John is just a high Christology of John. Everybody has a different thing, but the high Christology of John speaks to me. That the God of the universe hangs out with people like us. And I sing a lot. And well, Corey, first. You know why I sing? Because singing is letting my, and I don't sing to myself. I sing out loud. Like, especially if I'm going through it, I start singing. Ain't gonna let nobody, that's power. Have you ever wondered why every major movement in history has had lyrics or a song or a CD to it? Imagine all the people. Then you start listening and you're like, yeah, we're gonna get this. It's gonna take some time. You know, John Lennon, right? Or the old spirituals. Oh, rugged cross. Yeah, I sing it in Spanish. Con su fruto, you know, because Spanish is better. Right? Singing, praying, reading other people, and hanging out with people. Those are my spiritual disciplines. May the Lord be with you. And also with you.